Hello and welcome. My name is Alan and we are back with more Eats, Shoots, and Leaves. Let's go ahead and look at this. We'll be getting into this tiny chapter. Like I said, this is the smallest chapter, so it should be one episode. With that said, let's get into it. A little used punctuation mark. One of the most profound things ever said about punctuation came in an old style guide of the Oxford University Press in New York. If you take hyphens seriously, it said, you will surely go mad. And it's true. Just look how the little blighter escaped all previous categorization until I had to hunt it down on its own for this teeny weeny hooked on afterthoughty chapter. It's a funny old mark. The hyphen always has been. People have argued for its abolition for years. Woodrow Wilson said the hyphen was the most un-American thing in the world. Note the hyphen required in un-American. Churchill said hyphens were a blemish to be avoided wherever possible. Yet there will always be a problem about getting rid of the hyphen if it's not extramarital sex with a hyphen. It is perhaps extramarital sex, which is quite a different bunch of coconuts. Phrases abound that cry out for hyphens. Those much invoked examples of the little used car of superfluous hair remover, the pickled herring merchant, the slow moving traffic, and the 200 odd members of the Conservative Party would be all lost without it. The name comes from the Greek, as usual. What a lot of words the Greeks had for explaining spatial relationships, for placing sound, placing underneath, joining together, cutting off. Lucky for us, otherwise we would have to call ourselves punctuation marks names like joiner and half a dash, and so on. In this case, the phrase from which we can derive the name hyphen means under one, or into one, or together. So is possibly rather more sexy in its origins than we might otherwise have imagined from its utilitarian image today. Traditionally, it joins together words or words with prefixes to aid understanding. It keeps certain other words neatly apart and with an identical attention. Thus, the pickled herring merchant can hold his head high, and the coat tail doesn't look like an unpronounceable single word, and all thanks to the humble hyphen. The fate of the hyphen is, of course, implicated in the general charge occurring in the language at the moment, which will be discussed in the next chapter. The astonishing and quite dangerous drift back to the scripto continua of the ancient world, by which words are just hoiked together, is all one word with no initial capitals or helpful punctuation, the only good result of which being that if books manage to survive more than the next 20 years or so, younger readers will have no trouble reading James Joyce, since unhyphenated poetic compounds like snot green and scrotum tightening will look perfectly every day. Email addresses are inuring us to this trend. as are advertisements on the internet. Gents Rolex watch. And when I received an invitation to a BBC launch for the initiative called SoundStar, I hardly blinked an eye. In the old days, we used to ask the following question a lot. 1 word? 2 words? Hyphenated? With astonishing speed, the third alternative is just disappearing, and I have heard that people with double-barreled names are simply unable to get the concept across these days because so few people on the other end of the telephone know what a hyphen is. As a consequence, they receive credit cards printed with the name Anthony Armstrong Jones. Anthony Armstrong Jones, or even Anthony Armstrong Hyphen. Where should hyphens still go before we sink into a depressing world that writes, hello, how are you? What is this space bar thing for? Any idea? Altogether, no spaces, anything. Well, there are many legitimate uses for the hyphen. To prevent people casting aspersions at herring merchants who have touched a drop in their lives. Many words require hyphens to avoid ambiguous words such as co-respondent, reformed, remark. A reformed rock band is quite different than a reformed one. Likewise, a long-standing friend is indifferent from a long-standing one. A cross-section of the public is quite different from a cross-section of the public. And one could go on. Carefully placed hyphens do not always save the day, however, as I recently had good reason to learn, writing in the Daily Telegraph about the state of the modern punctuation. I alluded to the newspaper style book, carefully adding the hyphen to ensure the meaning was clear. I wasn't sure people had heard of style books, and can you believe it? 2 people wrote to complain. I had hyphenated wrongly, they said, with glee. Since there was no such thing as a newspaper style book, I must really have intended newspaper style book. I'll just stay here, and now that I've rarely been more fronted, what is a newspaper style book then? I yelled. Tell me what a newspaper style book would look like when it's at home. I still have not got over this. 2. It's still necessary to use hyphens when spelling out numbers, such as 32, 49. 3. When linking nouns with nouns, such as London, Brighton, train. Also, adjectives with adjectives. American, French, relations. Typesetters and publishers use a short dash known as an on rule for this function. Though it is less rigorously applied than it used to be, there is a rule that when a noun phrase such as stainless steel is used to qualify another noun, it is hyphenated as stainless steel kitchen. Thus, you have corrugated iron, but a corrugated iron roof. The match has a second half, but lots of second half excitement. Tom Jones was written in the 18th century, but is an 18th century novel. The train leaves at 7 o'clock, but is a 7 o'clock train. 5. Certain prefixes traditionally require hyphens. Un-American, anti-apartheid or apartheid, pro-hyphens, quasi-grammatical. 6. When certain words are to be spelled out, it is customary to use hyphens to indicate that you want the letters enunciated or pictured separately. Such as letter, hyphen, when you're spelling out a word. Purely for expedient. 7. Purely for expediency, the hyphen is used to avoid an unpleasant linguistic condition called letter collision. However, you might want to create compound words. There will always be some ghastly results, such as de-ice or shell-like. One of the main uses of the hyphen, of course, is to indicate that a word is unfinished and continues on the next line. Ignorance about where to split words has reached quite scary proportions. But, thankfully, this isn't the place to go into it. I'll just say that it's painstaking and not painstaking. Number 9. Hesitation and stammering are indicated by hyphens. I reach for the watering can. 10. When a hyphenated phrase is coming up and you are qualifying it beforehand, it is necessary to write, "He was 2 or 3-year-old." Even the bearing all of these rules in mind, however, one can't but feel that the hyphen is for the chop. Fowler's modern English usage, as far back as 1930, was advising that wherever reasonable, the hyphen should be dropped, and in the 2003 edition of the Oxford Dictionary of English suggests that it is heading for extinction. American usage is gung-ho for compound words, or should that be gungo? But a state of confusion reigns these days, with quite psychotic hyphenations arising in British usage, especially the rise of hyphens in phrasal verbs. Time to top up that pension, the advertisements tell us. Uneducated football writers will aver that the game kicked off at 3 p.m. and are not apparently ticked off afterwards. On the Times Books websites, I see that John Smith rounds up the latest crime fiction. But what if a writer wants his hyphens and can make a case for them? Nicholson Baker, in his book The Size of Thoughts, writes about his own deliberations when a intention copy editor deleted about 200 innocent tinker toy hyphens in the manuscript of one of his books. American copy editing, he says, has fallen into a state of demoralized confusion over hyphenated and unhyphenated compounds. On this occasion, he wrote, "Stet hyphen, let the hyphen stand," so many times that in the margin, in the end, he abbreviated it to SH. I steadied myself sick over the new manuscript. I steadied re-enter rather than re-enter, post-doc rather than post-doc, hot pedal rather than, or foot pedal rather than foot pedal, second hand rather than second hand, twist tie rather than twist tie, and pleasure nubbins rather than pleasure nubbins. It is probably better not to inquire what pleasure nubbins refers to here, incidentally, while we're still defending Baker's right to hyphenate. His pleasure nubbins, yes, all day, if he wants to. In the end, hyphen usage is just a big bloody mess and is likely to get messier. When you consider that 50 years ago it was correct to hyphenate Oxford Street as Oxford Street and tomorrow as tomorrow, you can't help but feel that prayer for eventual light in our darkness may be the only sane course of action. Interestingly, Kingsley Amis says that those who smugly object to hyphenation of the phrase fine tooth comb are quite wrong to assert that the phrase really ought to be hyphenated fine tooth comb. Evidently, there really used to be a kind of comb called a tooth comb, and you could buy it in various varieties of fineness. Isn't it a relief to know that? You learn something new every day. So yeah, that ends that chapter. Now, there's quite a bit because a lot of it's written. So let's go back here and go back over it a bit. They talk about the usage of hyphens, and you can really see how it changes. In the beginning, they talk about it if it's not extramarital sex, so extra hyphen marital, and then sex itself sets apart from it because the sex they're talking about is outside of the marriage, extramarital. But if you don't use a hyphen, it's just extra space marital space sex, and that just means more sex in the marriage inside the marriage, so extra sex maritally. You can kind of see now where some of these differences lie. They change the way things actually mean if you are incorrect in the usage of the hyphen. Let's see. She talks about the origins of the hyphen, that many grammarians see it as something to get rid of. American English, yes, this is something I've seen over the years. There's more and more words that just get crammed together. She uses the example, gents Rolex watch, all crammed together, no spaces. Yeah. Um, then she gives the example of a credit card. Because there are a number of people who have their names hyphenated. And it could end up Anthony Armstrong, comma, Jones. Anthony Armstrong, apostrophe Jones. Or even Anthony Armstrong, hyphen. When clearly the name is supposed to be Anthony Armstrong Jones. Should be a hyphen between Armstrong and Jones. So yeah. And she gives even more of this. Part 1, to prevent people casting aspersions at hairy mutants. Merchants, not mutants. Yeah. A reformed rock band is quite different from a reformed one. So they're both spelled the same, but you've got that hyphen between re and formed in one of them. So one is a band that's come back together, and the other is a band that's no longer committing crimes. They've reformed their ways. Yeah. Long-standing friend is different from a long-standing one. So, again, differences in the hyphen. One is a friend who is long-standing, who's been standing for a long time. And the other one is a long-standing friend, which I think I'm looking at them backwards. The long-standing is one who's been a friend for a long time. The other one is, yeah, they've been standing a long time. Plus, they're a friend of mine. A cross-section of the public is quite different from a cross-section of the public. One is a cross-section. It just a sample of the public. A group of people. While the other, it's a cross section where you cross the road. Newspaper style book. Newspaper space style book. So it's the style book used for newspapers. While the other is newspaper hyphen style book. So it's a newspaper style book, which is a book in the style of a newspaper. So you can see how hyphens can really differentiate things. Between numbers, 32, 30 hyphen 2, 49, 40 hyphen 9 if you're writing the word out instead of just numbering it. If you spell it out. Linking nouns, London, Brighton. So instead of, if you didn't have the hyphen, it would be London, Brighton, train. But the hyphen indicates it is for both locations. That specific location, that specific route. American-French relations. So we're talking about relations between the American and French, not necessarily relations from both, just willy-nilly. Yeah, 4. You can have words like stainless steel that do not require a hyphen. But when you're using it in a phrase like stainless steel kitchen, put a hyphen between stainless and steel, because the kitchen itself is stainless steel. Corrugated iron does not require a hyphen, but if it's in a bigger phrase as a descriptor, you want corrugated iron with a hyphen in it, roof, because the roof is corrugated iron. Yeah. Certain prefixes. Un-American. Anti-apartheid. Pro-hyphens. Quasi-grammatical. We talked about briefly as well when you're spelling out a word, you want it a hyphen between each one, showing if you're trying to write out this is how you would pronounce. F-A-R, far. You know, just as an example, they use the word K-N-Shem. K-E or K-Einishem? K-Einshem? I'm not sure. But it's K-E-Y-N-S-H-A-M. And then they talk about certain words that if you don't hyphenate them, they look very, very weird. De-ice. Almost looks like a whole other word if you have no hyphen. D-E-I-C-E. It looks like, should that be pronounced dice? Dice? But if you put the hyphen between it, you know it's to de-ice. Or shell-like. That's 3 L's. S-H-E-L-L-L-I-K-E. So it's like, to prevent confusion, shell-like. Yeah. Knowing where to separate the word painstaking. It's when you're doing something vigorous, something in-depth, you are taking pains to do so. So it is pains hyphen taking, not pain hyphen staking. No, it's painstaking. Talked about stuttering, it's in use for. Then they talk about he was a 2 hyphen or 3 hyphen year hyphen old. So yeah. So it's like the 2 could have been interspersed or replaced by the 3 could be replaced by the 2. So you would still put a hyphen behind the 2, even though it don't technically have anything it directly connects with. But yeah, the almost murder of the hyphen in grammar in English. She gives it an example where a writer used the hyphen so much that the editors were like, they tried to remove it. And it's like, no, not necessarily here, friend. Because with re-enter, re-enter, re-enter. That's why you would put a hyphen there. You don't want it to end up looking like it's a whole other word. Post-doc. Foot pedal, because you want the idea to indicate that it's a whole foot pedal, not just foot pedal. Second hand rather than second hand together, which I can kind of, see that. But twist tie, because the tie itself is something you twist around things, but they just separated them into twist space tie. It's like, no. Or pleasure nubbins with the hyphen, and they tried to replace with pleasure space nubbins. It's like, no, some words make sense when you put them together. And then they were showing some words used to use hyphens other places. Tomorrow used to be T-O hyphen morrow. Tomorrow. Fine tooth comb. It isn't necessarily that it's talking about a comb with fine teeth. As she explained, there used to be something called a tooth comb with different levels of fineness. And so it should be a fine tooth comb instead of fine tooth comb. So yeah. But that is the end of that chapter. We're almost done with the book. We have one chapter left to go, but it'll take a few episodes. Yeah, 204. 177 to 204 is what the pages say. Like I said, they're short. They're short little pages, so you can get a look at how they look. So yeah, the print's good enough that each page is rather short. But we're almost done. As always, educate thyself. Think, read, study, learn. Someone tells you something you have trouble believing. Ask them to cite their sources. I'll see you all in the next one. Until then, later.